Really talented people, and I'm going to introduce now Catherine from Canio to give you a little bit more info. If you need anything, just let me know.
Thank you, Rachel, and just a big thanks to the Jermain Library. It's really so wonderful to be in the Rotunda to have all different kinds of programming, including the programming that we have tonight. Just want to also mention one upcoming event. Next Thursday evening at the bookstore, we have a poetry reading with George Walsh, who's the editor of the New York School of Poetry book. Is that right?
New York City from the inside.
New York City from the inside. So if you like poetry or if you'd like to hear about New York from the inside, at the bookstore next Thursday at 6 o'clock, please join us. But today is the 100th anniversary of Bloomsday, so how auspicious is that? To prepare for today, for those of you that are emailing, we noted that we sent out a link for you to watch a wonderful film that Paul McIssac is actually an actor in, called In Bed with Ulysses. So just to show hands, did anybody get a chance to watch the film yet? Oh, good. Wonderful. Now, for those of you who did, held over by popular demand, the film will be available for one more week. And so, if you go to our website, there will be a link to the page that will show you how to actually get the password and a link to watch the film. It's definitely well worth it, and it complements the film very nicely. So what are we in for tonight? Well, who knows when we come to Joyce and Ulysses, right? What we're in for tonight is a lively roundtable discussion that will be moderated by Joe Shaw. Joe in the middle is well known as the executive editor of the News Press Group.
Express
News Group.
Yeah, we've changed it 3 times.
And also a Joyce aficionado, and he and the gentleman to his right, Peter Walsh, were really the inspiration, or part of the inspiration behind tonight's programming. Now, Peter is an impresario from New York, and he owned the well-known Irish watering hole known as Cooley's Bar and Grill in Washington Heights. 35 years were you going?
35 years, yes.
So joining those two, we have the critic Joan Baum, who is here with her tuxedo shirt on. Joan is a retired academic who reviews books for the Express News Group at WSHU and other outlets. She's a tenor, she wants to know she's a tenor in the Choral Society, and she wants you to know that Joyce was a tenor. So that's a bit of tribute. She brings to the panel. Thank you, Joan. As I mentioned, we have the actor Paul McIssac here, but we have 2 actors. We have Kate Mueth with him as well. But Paul, for those of you who don't know him, is a stage and screen actor. He's appeared in a number of feature films, including Goodfellas and Doc's Kingdom. And as I mentioned, he is one of the actors in Bed with Ulysses. Kate Mueth here at the far, you're on my left. She's on my left. She's an actress and choreographer. She is the founder and artistic director of the Neo-Politcal Cowgirls, which hopefully most people in the room know about. They're having a benefit tomorrow night, so ask me about that later. But the Neo-Politcal Cowgirls is a women's dance theater company which creates storytelling, theatrical opportunities, and work for women. And they also offer choreography workshops for girls and women, which is wonderful. So if you haven't read it, or if you read it and you don't understand it, or if you started it and you feel it gets sent to fire, we're here tonight to, as we described, Bloomsday, make Ulysses demystified. So please give a warm round of applause for our panel and
So first and best, can everybody hear this?
Yes.
Because I'm going to blow everybody out of the room with microphones if that's going to be a problem. Now, if we reach a point where you can't hear us, say something and we'll use the microphones, okay? Or can you hear?
Yes, we'll raise my
Yeah, just raise your hands and let us know. I'm afraid.
Or come closer.
Yes, I'm afraid if we're holding the microphones, I think all of us are pretty good at projecting. I don't want to blow everybody out of the ring. So. As Catherine said, everybody who's here probably is aware of the significance of this Bloomsday, June 16th. This is 100 years from the first publication of Ulysses in book form by Shakespeare and Company in Paris. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar, which I'm guessing you're not, Bloomsday is June 16th because the book Ulysses is June 16th, 1904. That's the day on which all of the events in the book take place, morning into late night. So I want to apologize to everybody in advance because I'm pretty sure despite this pretty amazing turnout, I did not expect a turnout like this. I'm pretty sure Catherine planned this just as a personal favor to me, because just to shut me up about the need to do something on Bloomsday every year, because I'm constantly in her ear saying, what are we going to do for Bloomsday? What are we going to do for Bloomsday? So I thank you, Catherine. This really is for me, it's not for you. I really just wanted to get smart people together to talk about Ulysses, and I think I've accomplished that task.
Happy birthday, John.
Yeah, thank you. So, before we start, Catherine mentioned that the title is Demystifying Ulysses, and that's our goal here. So, I want to ask the audience with a show of hands, please be honest. Who has read the book and is a fan? Third. That's fine. Who has tried to read the book and given up? And there's some overlap there. That's okay. And who has never tackled it, but is, shall we say, Joyce curious? Great. All right. Well, this is a good mix of people. I think that's healthy. No question. So, all right. Then let's do it this way then. In our conversations leading up to the event, Kate had mentioned yesterday when we spoke that she hasn't reread the book recently in preparation for this roundtable discussion. And I'm just going to warn you that none of us have done that. But I'm going to say something that's likely true for all five of us up here. I never stop reading Ulysses. I'm constantly reading Ulysses, and it's been a lifelong journey worthy of Ulysses, or Odysseus, however you want to refer to him. And it's not just the book, but the many books. One of them being Stuart Gilbert's completely necessary guidebook to the book, which, as you can see from its condition, I have used very extensively, and I strongly recommend it. Stuart Gilbert spoke with James Joyce about the book, and so he has a lot of knowledge about what Joyce intended. But I love the audiobook, and I'm constantly reading and listening to different parts of the audiobook, which brings an entirely new dimension, especially to a couple of the harder chapters. Hearing it read out loud is absolutely an epiphany, to use one of Joyce's favorite words. And there's also lectures in the Great Courses series by James Heffernan of Williams College that are just amazing. And they help get into some of the things we're going to talk about here today. So in this conversation, we're going to just talk about our shared love of the work. That's what we like to do. I think it's the greatest work in English literature, full stop. And I want to hear everybody else's thoughts about it, so we'll start there. Let me start by asking each of the panelists. So I'll start with Joan. What is it about Ulysses that got its hooks into you?
Well, as a book reviewer, I'm usually asked, what makes for a good book? And my answer over the years has simplified to this. It's a book that I would reread. And in rereading it over and over again, it's as though it's de novo for the first time. Not actually first time, but I always see more in it that I haven't seen before. And when I knew that Bloomsday was coming up, the same thing happened. I started again, and although I studied in graduate school literature, there are still sections of the book that I do not understand. And that doesn't bother me at all. But it is a book that I'm attracted to more and more, and particularly not reading it so much as hearing the words. The music just compels me. Yes, it in the morning. But the rhythms possess you. And a book that's written, I think, of William Blake's very famous opening to one of his collection of poems, hear the voice of the bard. It's not what the words say on the page. You just hear that language.
And I think that's particularly true of Joyce, right? Because music, he was a singer. He was one of the great singers of his time, a tenor. And music was in everything he did, so I think that's part of it. Peter, what about you? What is it about this book that inspires this kind of passion?
I've read the book probably a dozen times, and I go back to it like anybody does when something comes up, and I say, oh, let me look and see what Joyce opinion on it. But what got me into it was Portrait of Mouse. That was the preamble of the book. And then we said, I don't want to step on one of your lines, but why don't you say the line?
I was going to say the first thing we'll talk about is the ending of Portrait of the Artist, which is 26 April. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race.
That is the greatest declaration of independence by any artist, and it opened an entire door for me to want to read Ulysses, because that statement gave him the freedom to leave Ireland, leave the Catholic Church, leave his friends, leave his family, and go wander as a nomad, as a legitimate starving artist. And he did it, and Ulysses was a calling to me to read. I went to Trinity in Dublin. I did my diploma in Anglo-Irish literature. I was out to the army. I drank in all those bars for a few years. I followed his tale. I met the voices of Ulysses every day. I met the voices. And it came along, and Ulysses became the compendium of literature of all the world. Every style, the stream of conscience. I mean, the stream of conscience is us. He is, if Joyce was alive today, the soundtrack to Joyce is really jazz. And that's what he brings it to at the end. Jazz has infinite its weight, but this is what the man, he orchestrates this book musically. It's orchestrated, unbelievable, and full of music. And that orchestration gives him the permission then to play jazz.
And he created the conscience of the human race, basically, in Ulysses. So now we move over to the side of the table where we have two people who have played characters from Ulysses, so you've embodied, Paul, Leopold Bloom, at least a segment of Leopold Bloom. And by the way, the movie is worth seeing. It's very good, and he is amazing in it, and you should watch it. It's about a performance that was being staged about 10 years ago, right? And the character of Leopold Bloom was broken into a bunch of different people, which I thought was a great way to do it. But let me back up and just ask you, what brought you to this work first? Did you experience it on the page or on the stage first?
On the radio.
Really?
All right.
WBAI, which I worked at for many years, did an annual reading of Bloomsday back in the day. And we had many wonderful Irish authors and actors who came, and I didn't know Ulysses particularly. I didn't have that in my childhood or in my education particularly. But I was a radio person, and to pick up on the theme that we're all agreeing on, I didn't understand half of what I was hearing, but I understood the music. I don't understand half the time what Coltrane was doing, but I got the music. And so the beauty of the words were just, I had the same experience with Shakespeare, but I have to say, he's closer. I feel much closer. He's the beginning of the modern novel, really, in many ways. And so I heard it and read, was part of the staff, so everybody read. So that was my experience of coming to it as, and I have to say, for those of you who have not read it or read it out loud, I have to tell you, and listening to people read it is great, but just yourself, just read it out loud, and as you go along, and some of us are going to read today, you'll see that when you stumble on a word or a phrase and then look it up, as we all have to do with Shakespeare and things like that, when you figure out how to get your mouth around the words, it comes to life. And he comes to life, and Dublin comes to life, and life comes to life. So yeah, I came to it from this movie.
That's very cool. Kate is my oldest Joyce buddy. When I moved up there, yeah, I think so. No, I think you're my oldest Joyce buddy in the world because I moved up here 24 years ago and didn't really know anybody and was trying to find people to talk with me about Ulysses. And a friend said, you should talk to Kate Mueth. And we had lunch, and I still remember having lunch with you and talking about Ulysses. It was just fun to do that because I never had a chance to do it. So then I had the experience of having you actually perform the Penelope chapter, the last chapter in the book, and I think it's wonderful too. So you clearly have sort of absorbed this work, and particularly that part of it, I think. But tell us about why you think why should people who haven't tried to read it yet, why is it worth the effort?
I think it's very interesting. I came at it as an actor, only, like, I'm not as petty or as brilliant as these people. I feel very actually honored to be at this table, to be honest. I just was hired on to make as an actor, to be Molly, for, I don't know if any of you know Victoria Baum. She's a composer, an opera composer. And she wrote an opera called Molly Many Bloom. And it was the Molly soliloquy, or parts of it, because it's very long, 80 pages or so, 8 sentences, that's it. She asked me to be the first act, so that the audience would begin to understand sort of what's being said in the opera, which who knew it could get harder to understand than reading it on the page, but it can, put it in an opera. And so that's how I came to it. And for me, I love it because when I read something, or when I hear a story, or watch a story, where I feel my humanity being given permission to be imperfect, and fallible, and broken, and disgusting, and mistaken, and on fire, and doing things that I shouldn't be doing, and thinking things I shouldn't be thinking, and feeling the vibrancy of eating and drinking, and seeing human faces in the street, and smelling the smells, and seeing the sea, and that is, to me, the work, the job of literature, of art. And just what you said so beautifully is bringing life to life. And that's what this is, and like you're saying, you can open any page or to any chapter, start to read it, and maybe not even understand it, but you hear those words, I hear those words, and I don't always know what I'm saying. I mean, I will today, I promise, but like when I'm reading one of the many chapters, I don't always know, but there is something, it's the way it works, like Shakespeare, it works on your body, and it works on your being, and it answers questions that we didn't know we even had about being human, and it tells us answers that we maybe don't even understand about being human, and so that's why it's worth it. And I'm a big fan of going into the hard things that we don't understand. I don't think we do enough of that, particularly as Americans. I think we dig in, and not probably this room, but I often find, even with students I teach, that there's an aversion to hard things, or to be curious about that which we don't understand. And I think that becomes a cultural problem. But that's a whole, we need a bottle of whiskey for that, to discuss that. And that's why it's worth it, because I think it sets our humanity free and lets us breathe into everything that's right and wrong and terrible and wonderful about being human.
So there's a couple of things I want to tell people who haven't read the book yet. And one of them is that impression and the ability of the book to relate what it's like to be a human, what it's like inside your mind. And by the way, the stream of consciousness in the book, Joyce was not the first writer to do that, but I think he's the first one to have done it anywhere close to as well as Ulysses does it. And it should be outdated, because these are people who lived in 1904. And the most amazing thing about this book is that most of the stuff in the book is absolutely exactly the same as it is now. People thought the same way, their minds worked the same way. The difficulty in the book is that it isn't 1904 anymore, and so their popular culture references are all completely lost on us. It would have been, for the readers of the time, they would have understood what the songs they're referencing and the advertisements that they're referencing. We don't, so we have to get over that hill. But it has just this absolute permanence about how it's just as alive today as it was when he wrote it 100 years ago. And that's one thing I want to say. The other thing is, so people call the book unreadable. And I just want to dispel that completely right now. I'm going to ask Peter, actually, we ended with Stephen Dedalus' final words in Portrait of the Artist. Stephen, of course, is Joyce's alter ego. And his last line in Portrait is about, essentially, I'm going to go write Ulysses. So let's start with the beginning, which I think is one of the great beginnings to a book ever, just for how evocative it is. But it's also just completely readable. So I'm going to let Peter show you how readable.
One background, Buck Mulligan based on Gogarty, St. John Gogarty, who was a competitor of Joyce. And Gogarty was the inheritor of the Oscar Wilde seat. He was a Whig, fantastic, well-to-do, almost like a West Grade. Went to Trinity, one of the few Catholics that did. But they broke up in a sense. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. A yellow dressing gown ungirdled was sustained gently behind him on the mild morning air. He held the bowl aloft and intoned, "Intorio Halted, he peered down the dark winding stairs and called out coarsely, "Come up, Teach! Come up, you fearful Jesuit!" Solemnly, he came forward and mounted the brown gun rest. He faced about and blessed bravely thrice the tower, the surrounding land, and the awaking mountains. Then, catching sight of Stephen Dedalus, he bent towards him and made rapid crosses in the air, gurgling in his throat and shaking his head. Stephen Dedalus, displeased and sleepy, leaned his arms on top of the staircase and looked coldly at the shaking, gurgling face that blessed him, grained and hewed like pale oak. Buck Mulligan peeped an instant under the mirror, then covered the bowl smartly. "Back to the barracks!" he said sternly. He added in a preacher's tone, "For this our dearly beloved is the genuine Christine, body and soul and blood and womb." Slow music, please. Shut your eyes, gents. One moment. A little trouble about those white corpuscles? Silence, oh! He peered sideways, up, and gave a long, slow whistle of call. Then paused a while in rapt attention, his even white teeth glistening here and then with gold points, chrysotomos. Two strong, shrill whistles answered through the calm. "Thanks, old chap," he cried briskly. "That will do nicely. Hey, switch off the current, will you?" He skipped off the gun rest and looked gravely at his watch, gathering about his legs the loose folds of his gown. The plump, shadowed face and sullen, oval jowl recalled a prelate patron of the arts in the Middle Ages. A pleasant smile broke quietly over his lips. "The mockery of it all," he said gaily. "Your absurd name, an ancient Greek." He pointed his finger in friendly jest and went over to the parapet laughing to himself. Stephen Dedalus stepped up, followed him wearily halfway, and sat down on the edge of the gun rest, watching him, still as he propped his mirror on the parapet, dipped the brush in the bowl, and lathered cheeks and neck. Buck Mulligan's gay voice went on. "My name's absurd too. Malachi Mulligan. 2 dactyls. But it has a helmet ring, hasn't it? Tripping and sunny like the Buck himself. We must go to Athens. Will you come if I can get the ant to fork over 20 quid? He laid the brush aside and laughing with delight cried, will he come? The Jesuit Jesuit. Ceasing, he began to shave with care. And tell me, Margaret, Stephen said quietly. Yes, my love. How long is Haynes going to stay in this tower? Buck Mulligan showed a shaken sheepdog on the right shoulder. God, isn't he dreadful? He said frankly. A ponderous Saxon. He thinks you're not a gentleman. God, he's bloody English, bursting with money and indigestion, because he comes from Oxford. You know, Dickens, you have a real Oxford man. He can't make you out. Oh, my name for you is the best. Kinch, the knife blade.
So, Ulysses starts with a black mass. It starts with something that is completely sacrilegious. And I want to talk about this book. This book has a reputation. It was banned for the longest time. We won't go into the history, but it was a lever for what is literature versus what is pornography. And this is a book that is lewd, and it is coarse in places, and it certainly doesn't pull any punches. I believe every bodily function is represented. I think I'm correct. I don't think I've missed any of them. I think they're all in there. And he talks about them, because it's part of life. But the thing I want to talk about that section is, I know you have an anecdote about the Martello Tower. There really is a Martello Tower in Dublin that Joyce stayed in for six nights that he based this on. And I had the luck of going to Dublin and going up to the top of the tower. I'm assuming, has everybody done it? Have you been? No. All right. What's amazing to me is you walk to the top of that tower and it feels like you've been there. Because the description of what I saw, it was absolutely what I read. Captured it. But that's the thing about the book, right? It captures life in a way that I don't know. It's certainly the first modern novel to do that.
And this is the opening of the novel in those few pages. And this can frighten a lot of people off. What's Chrysotomos mean? And that's a golden orator. Or in this gold taps on Gogety, or in this case, Buck Mulligan's teeth. So the gold and the glow of gold is a golden orator. So there's one word that explodes the whole meaning. I mean, you take one word from Old Greek, and Joyce never took Greek. He's always mad at him, so he took Canio. That's just one point, and it explodes a whole theater of literature to you from one word.
But the fact that it's Greek, too,
That's great.
is important because it ties back into Ulysses. So we should talk a little bit about the book in general. Paul, you want to talk a little bit about it? So this is a book that has three main characters. And it takes place over the course of an entire day in Dublin, in great detail, and it jumps from character to character. So can you sort of, and I'm sorry, this is not really a fair thing to ask somebody to do. Can you kind of sum up the book?